Chapter 6. Rika. Hearing her name called, Rika lifted her eyes to see an almost white bob catching the sunlight illuminating the dark corner of the soba restaurant. I haven't seen you in ages. Do you mind if I sit with you? It was hard to work out where the woman's hair ended and her silky alabaster skin began. She was only in her 40s, but rather than aging her, the white gave her an ageless, fairy-like charm. Of course, have a seat. Rika rested the bowl of wakame soba she'd been sipping on the table with a clunk. Yuriko Mizushima, formerly a well-regarded journalist at the Shumi Weekly, sat down on the cushion lying on top of the low, angular chair. Rika had barely seen Mizushima since she'd transferred to the books department 3 years earlier. She caught a glimpse now of Mizushima's gleaming loafers. As far as business attire went, there was no faulting her crisp look made up of blazer, stylish button-down shirt, and chino trousers, but it said woman in her 40s less than it did dapper young boy. All of the materials looked like they could be washed at home, and she wore only the lightest coat of makeup. This woman understands what a good amount means for her, Rika thought to herself. At the corners of her eyes, set far apart in her face, she was accumulating wrinkles. Even the downy hair growing out of the large mole on the side of her nose seemed harmless and somehow cute. How odd to bump into you. I wouldn't have thought you had lunch in places like this. Although I guess it's not really lunchtime, is it? I was busy going around bookshops and forgot to eat. Mizushima and Rika were the only customers in the establishment. The smell of dashi filling the restaurant and Mizushima's matter-of-fact way of speaking, which took Rika straight back to when they worked together, made her heart feel lighter. Mizushima had once occupied a unique position at the magazine, both among colleagues and when out on assignments. Even when interviewing policemen and bureaucrats, she hadn't pretended to be someone she wasn't. The food in the canteen is great, but I get claustrophobic if I spend too long in that building, Rika replied. It's important to get out sometimes, and not only for work engagements. Do you come here often? The soba restaurant, in a back alley just 2 minutes walk from the office, was not especially well frequented, no doubt due to its obscure location and its understated exterior that made it hard to distinguish from a regular house. The elderly couple who ran the place relied mostly on takeaway orders for their business, taking turns to run in and out, and the service was rough and ready. Yet their freshly made soba was fragrant, and drinking the water it had been cooked in, which was served after the meal, would leave your legs feeling toasty and warm throughout the afternoon, in a way Rika felt sure was good for her. Now that Reiko was no longer inviting her to lunch, she had no need to stick to the staff canteen. Reiko, it seemed, was taking a break from the fertility clinic. Rika hadn't heard as much from her directly, but her texts, which had previously been arriving weekly, had dried up entirely. It was obvious that Ryosuke's reluctance was having an effect on her. Given the delicate nature of the topic, Rika felt she had no choice but to wait until Reiko confided in her to speak of it. Rika didn't know whether that meant she was being considerate or not. Today was bring your own bento day at the nursery, but I didn't have the time to make one for my husband and me. Do you make bento boxes for your child? Only on the odd occasion. She's normally given lunch at the nursery. Besides, my daughter's 4 now, so even that's only until she gets into primary school. I never bust a gut making the fancy ones with anime characters and so on. I just do rice, umeboshi, rolled omelette, some meat or something left over from dinner the previous night, then stuff in something green, and that's the lot. That's still so impressive. Rika still couldn't summon the interest for getting married and having kids. She knew it was expected of her, but sometimes she felt that the day when she'd truly want to do it would never come. Mizushima ordered a rice bowl topped with eggs, meat, and onions, then turned back to Rika. Not at all. I've got much more time these days than when I was working for the magazine. I can go home on time most days. And the biggest thing is the sense of safety that comes from having no unexpected demands made of you. What about you? Do you have anything exciting on the go? In most firms, the sales team was perceived as the face of the company, but at the Shimaisha offices there was a tendency to see it as behind-the-scenes work. Employees might move into the department after giving birth or if they had long-term health issues. When Rika had heard that Mrs. Shima was going to move to sales because she couldn't juggle childcare with her magazine work, she'd felt appalled descend over her own vision of the future. The sweet salty smell of Mrs. Shima's soba wafted over from behind, where it was being prepared. Rika lowered her voice to answer. I've just come from the house of the victim in the Shinonome case. Though she didn't agree to an interview. The mother of a middle school boy who'd lost his life in a brutal attack at the hands of a friend was being publicly excoriated. A single mother working 2 jobs, she'd not been at home with her son as much as she'd have liked, and had missed the warning signs. The son had first met the boy, who would befriend and then kill him, while walking to a convenience store to buy dinner. Of all the takes people had on the case, the one that stood out was that this was a tragedy brought on by the failings of contemporary culture that prioritized ready meals over homemade food. Even the Shumi Weekly, though it hadn't overtly criticized the mother, had featured some opinions on the subject of food that were directed at working mothers in general. Rika, responsible for covering the story, had vehemently opposed the article right up to its publication, but her opinion hadn't been heeded. The issue was just out, which had only exacerbated her feelings of reluctance about going to see the mother today. She still couldn't get the sound of that weak, wavering voice on the other side of the intercom out of her head as it spoke. I'm terribly sorry to have inconvenienced everyone like this. It was all my fault. Mrs. Shima lowered her thick eyebrows and her mole twitched. Oh, that case. I can't help but think of my own situation, of course. It's ridiculous to blame it on the mother. It's just sheer bad luck that it happened to that household. I'm sure there will be plenty of times in the future when I'm too busy to make dinner and tell my kids to go and get something for themselves. If only Mrs. Shima were on the editorial desk, Rika thought to herself. It was so hard to make her opinion heard. She felt like an insignificant bit player, gathering up the components the desk needed to write the pieces their way, looking on at a current whose momentum exceeded her own. You're being so patient, Rika. Everyone of my generation is so impressed. If you become the first woman to make the desk, I won't even be envious. I'll simply feel pure delight. Mrs. Shima was almost certainly the first woman at the Shumi Weekly to have taken not just maternity leave, but childcare leave as well. I really tried to make motherhood and a career work. I used everything at my disposal, spent so much of the money I'd saved up when I was single. I employed a babysitter until a space in nursery became free, because I was so determined not to be a burden on the people around me. But it turned out that I wasn't superhuman. That's not a bad thing, I know now, but back then I believed that I had to be. She lowered her eyelashes, and a shadow fell across the bags under her eyes. Nowadays I think that maybe it would have been all right to be a bit of a burden to the people around me. Young people like you are paying the price for people like me gritting my teeth, bearing it all myself and not showing any weakness. I didn't ask for help, and that stopped other people around me from asking for it. Mrs. Shima's lunch was brought over, and she energetically broke her chopsticks in 2. Fluffy egg-enveloped pieces of pork and kamaboko on a bed of rice, stained with soy sauce. As she chewed, she looked at Rika. You seem different somehow. You used to have the air of a monk in training. It must be because I've put on weight recently, from eating so much. I've swelled right out. Oh, you look far better like this. You used to be so skinny it made me concerned to look at you. You seem to throw yourself headlong into your work, and didn't take care of yourself at all. When I see people who don't look after themselves, I end up feeling guilty myself. There was the sound of the glass door opening. The old woman returned from her delivery and headed silently towards the kitchen. As if he'd been waiting for her cue, the man pointed the remote control at the TV and turned up the volume. The lines from the dubbed Western drama flowed clearly and brightly through the restaurant. No sooner were they sitting face to face across the acrylic screen than Kajii smiled and said, Well, was the salty butter ramen to your liking? Rika willed herself not to blush, but she could feel her ears growing hot. She went through her memories of that dawn excursion 4 days previously, attempting to ignore the prison officer's gaze. Is it the cold that makes a bowl of ramen from a regular chain restaurant taste that good? Why are you asking me, when you know the answer better than anyone? There was nothing wheedling about her way of speaking today, and what she said landed with Rika with alarming ease. She didn't need Kajii to point out to her that having sex with Makoto just once had made her feelings toward him a lot clearer. Men are simply very warm creatures, aren't they? Where I grew up, February was freezing, so you feel ever so grateful for that warmth. I was at high school when I catoned on to the fact. Your first boyfriend was a salesman who came and went between Tokyo and Niigata, yes? Where did you meet him? Rika opened up her memo pad and held her pen poised. Usually Kajii would assume a wary look as soon as Rika began to write, so she'd been trying to keep her note-taking to a minimum. But today Kajii's eyes were roving around as though she were dreaming, and she seemed quite unbothered by what Rika was up to. Seizing her chance, Rika began scribbling. He approached me as I was perusing the works of Carl Sagan in my local bookshop. I was very into reading as a young girl. He told me that he liked Sagan too, and he would love it if a girl like me would show him around the town. He tried to persuade me to be his lover immediately, but I brushed him off. I took him bento boxes and sweets that I'd made, and he was so overjoyed that I kept it up. Each time I saw him, he would do his very best to seduce me. On Valentine's Day, I baked him a cake. For the first time, I lied to my parents, and the two of us stayed over at a hotel near Niigata Station. There was a snowstorm that night. That was how things began between us. Then someone at my school who saw us coming out of a love hotel together spread the rumor that he was paying me for my time, as was very much the trend back then, and we were forced to separate. It was only then that I found out he was married. But that's neither here nor there to me. I treasure my memories with him. To Rika's surprise, Kajii brushed away a tear from her eye with the back of her little finger. Rika fought away her feeling of discomfort. She had to remember the intensity of the time spent in the hotel room with Makoto and the chilly reality when she stepped out onto the street. She mustn't forget that feeling of the magic fading away, or else she would end up being sucked into Kajii's view of the world. It seems as though you've patched up things with your boyfriend, so why don't you make him something for Valentine's Day? I've never once given him anything for Valentine's, let alone something I've baked myself. He doesn't go for all that stuff. He finds it too heavy. In that case, avoid sickly sweet chocolate and do something like a cotter quartz. It's a simple recipe, perfect for beginners. Cotter. It's French for quarters. It's a pound cake that uses equal amounts of egg, flour, butter, and granulated sugar. 150 grams of each. It's easy to remember, no? No, don't write it down, memorize it. It's outstanding with lemon as well. Organic, Japan-grown lemons, great in the zest. You can add vanilla essence too, if you have some, and glaze the finished product with rum. Cake making sounds so hard, though. I'm not sure I'm up to it. Rika was sure she'd sampled more homemade confectionery than most. Back at her girls' school, she'd received a constant stream of homemade pound cakes and cookies from her admirers. Frequently, the cakes were undercooked, or coated the tongue and refused to come off, or were hard and dry as rock. Eating them, she'd felt that she could sense her admirers' saccharine scent, their body temperature. The stuff you could buy at the convenience store tasted far better. When Rika had first got to know Reiko and sampled her homemade apple pie, she had been blown away by how good it was, how sophisticated the flavor. Oblivious to Rika's musings, Kajii went on speaking. Oven baking is a perfect pursuit for busy people like you. It'll give you an understanding of what it means to put your time to good use. If possible, you should try to serve him the cake when it's fresh out of the oven. Pound cake is at its most flavorsome the day after it's been baked, when it's had a chance to take on its full richness, but I personally love a thick slice of it when it's still warm. You say that he has an aversion to home baking, but I'm certain that's because he's never sampled a freshly baked cake. Rika knew that after Makoto's father had died, his mother had worked in sales for a cosmetics company to earn money for the family and hadn't been at home very much. Like Rika herself, Makoto wouldn't have grown up eating the food his mother had cooked. Did you always make cakes on Valentine's Day for the men you were seeing? Knowing that Kajii had dated several men at one time, the thought of the effort involved made Rika feel almost faint. The new mission she'd been assigned seemed to her nothing but a hassle. She had no faith she'd be able to make a cake rise, and she couldn't conceive of Makoto being pleased by the gift. Absolutely. In the days before Valentine's Day, my apartment would be transformed into a patisserie. In her conversational element, Kajii seemed to be genuinely enjoying herself. Feeling as if something sweet had become stuck in her throat, Rika gave a dry cough. She remembered her reason for coming. Is it okay to assume that you're agreeing to an exclusive interview? Yes, Kajii said, nodding, and Rika promptly dropped her pen. She lifted herself from the seat to fetch it, and as she looked down at it rolling across the floor, she felt her vision go double. But I haven't said that I'll do it with you, Kajii said coldly, as Rika sat back down. Rika took a sharp inhale. Cocking her head with an expression of distaste, Kajii was looking baldly at her. Sitting here looking at you, I feel my heart drying up like a desert. It's so exhausting to watch people who live in such a sacrificial way. It makes me feel as though I'm being accused of something. What are you pulling that face for? So you're actually noticing me after all? What are you talking about, you idiot? Kajii spat out dismissively, and Rika could see her fleshy jowls trembling furiously. That look again, Rika thought, of late. Even when she was cruel to Rika, there was a certain curiosity, a desire for affection mixed up in Kajii's expression. Did she really hate women as she said? Was it not that she was trying her best to convince herself of the fact? If so, then why, when she was otherwise so true to her desires, would she try so persistently to push away this wish to be close to another woman? Rika only realized that she was staring intently at Kajii when, for the first time, Kajii turned away from Rika in embarrassment. In any case, you should master cake baking, even if you only learn how to make one kind. It will help you understand the art of wall building. You don't have any walls in your life, you see. Your work and your private life, your true feelings and your social self, everything is mixed up. It's frankly tiring to watch. Once that roughness about you has disappeared, I'll be happy to tell you everything. For the Cotter Quartz recipe, consult my blog. The trick is to aerate the butter well and mix in the flour with quick strokes. Kajii nodded as if in satisfaction at something beyond the room in which she sat. She looked like a master chef, tasting her stew and finding its flavor thoroughly intoxicating. From the next room came the sound of a woman, not too young by the sound of things, singing an off-key pop song. Rika thought she'd heard the melody before. When it came to the bridge, she realized it was Scream's latest hit. In the dim interior of a karaoke box 5 minutes walk from Idabashi Station, Rika and Shinoi sat at right angles around a low table. This was their chosen spot when they needed to meet in proximity to the office, the booths meaning they could remain unseen. The two mics lay on the table, still clothed in their cellophane covers, and the muted TV screen played commercials for the most recent big-hit bands. The victim's mother had just moved to Shinano from Fukui Prefecture and wouldn't have known about any of the rumors circulating about the boy's family. I guess there was nobody to warn her. She was probably just glad that her son had made a friend and was spending time at his house. A colleague of hers at the hospital said it bothered her that whenever she called, nobody picked up, but she had no time to visit and check that everything was okay. The assailant's father had once got into a disagreement with a parent of one of his classmates, and as a result his friends stopped coming round to his house. In his loneliness, the boy had been looking for someone to hang out with who didn't know the rumors. All this Shinoi told her freely, guided by her questioning, as he drank his shoshu and iced oolong tea. Rika put her memo pad away in her bag and bowed her head in gratitude. Thanks so much. I'll try speaking to people around the assailant's house again. And how are things going with Kajii? I finally got her to agree to doing an exclusive interview, but apparently she's reluctant to do it with me, another woman. She said she'll do it on the condition that I bake a cake, Rika said with a smile, and raised her pu'er tea, now thoroughly cold, to her lips. Shinoi tapped his cigarette that rested on the edge of the ashtray. A cake? Why? Rika brought him up to date on the situation, leaving out the part about Makoto, then pulled from her bag a printed blog entry in a clear file, dated October 2013. There was the recipe for Cotter Quartz, together with a section of Kajii's writing about her love of confectionery, so long as it was the real thing, and used lots of butter. And her loathing of the individually wrapped slices of pound cake that were given as gifts or bought in convenience stores. I'm in a bit of a bind with it, though. For a start, I don't have an oven at home. Then, you need all kinds of equipment to make cakes, right? I asked my friend who loves cooking if I can borrow her kitchen, but her husband's got the flu, and I don't think it's going to be possible. And there's only 4 days left until Valentine's Day. Rika didn't know if what Reiko had written in her text was true, or if she was simply avoiding her. But even if she'd succeeded in baking a cake at Reiko's house, she'd be way down the denantoshi line, which made serving it to Makoto fresh from the oven out of the question. She could hire one of the kitchen studios used for photo shoots, but most of them were daytime only, and besides, right before Valentine's Day, they'd be fully booked up. There was a pause, and then Shinoi said, without changing expression, "You can come over to my place now if you want. It's got a built-in oven that's actually quite high-spec. I've got cake-making equipment there, too. There's a supermarket on the ground floor of the building, which I think will still be open. Anything I don't have, you can buy there." She glanced at him to check for the signs of any hidden intention in his eye, but a second later she swallowed back her doubts and her words. Looking at her watch, she saw it was already past 10:30. She would go to his apartment. It was only one stop away and close to the station, go to the supermarket and bake a cake. Makoto was just about to send a book to print and would almost certainly still be at work. She couldn't miss this opportunity. Seeing Rika nod, Shinoi got up and opened the door to the booth. He paid the bill, then went down the stairs by the reception. Rika followed. When she stepped outside, he was already hailing a taxi. She got into the passenger seat, conscious of the people around her. Shinoi gave his address and the car set off in the direction of Yotsuya. Rika started. "I thought your apartment was near Suidobashi? That's just the cheap one-room apartment that I'm renting. My real home is where we're headed now. I don't go there much. It's very close, in Arakicho." By real home, did he mean the place he'd lived before his divorce? Rika wondered. Did that mean his ex-wife would be there? She felt concerned by the thought that his ex might come waltzing in on the two of them, but this feeling was surpassed by her sense of curiosity and her worries about baking a good cotter quartz. "I'm fairly sure there's a bowl, a whisk, and a spatula there." Their eyes met in the rearview mirror. She was the first to look away. When they turned off the main road, they came to a quiet residential area that felt a million miles from the parade of endless neon outside Idabashi Station. The taxi descended the hill of Arakicho, which was shaped like a bowl, stopping when it reached the base. The apartment block, clearly designed for families, looked out over a tiny park, furnished with just a sandpit and a swing. From the ground floor supermarket open until 1 a.m. spilled a bright white light that gave the swing in the park a long shadow. The supermarket chain was known for its selection of organic vegetables, imported sweets, and coffee. In the dairy section, where Rika headed first, was a notice reading due to supply shortages. Sales of butter are currently limited to 1 item per customer, but luckily there were 2 remaining packets of Yotsuba unsalted butter. She added a roll of aluminium foil, Japanese organic lemons, bags of flour and granulated sugar, and a carton of eggs into her basket, and headed to the cash registers. The cashier loaded her shopping into paper bags. As she and Shinoi walked out through the automatic doors together, Rika was taken by the sensation that she'd slipped into a parallel world. In that world, she'd started living here, close to the office, with an older man from the same industry whose first marriage had collapsed, and someday in the future they would get married and have children. The thought didn't cause her excitement, but it did seem somehow grounded. They climbed a short flight of stairs and passed by the caretaker's office, now empty. Shinoi took out a bunch of keys held together with a keyring featuring the cartoon mascot for his news agency and used one of them to open the door. While the lift with its old metal doors headed for the 4th floor, only the rustling of her paper shopping bags saved them from total silence. As he inserted his key in the door to his apartment, Rika found herself holding her breath. Moving into the room first, Shinoi switched on the lights. A silver carpet, its pile thoroughly flattened, led from the lobby down the hall and into the living room that spread out beyond. The dry, chilly air made her sneeze. She took off her shoes and lined them up before following Shinoi inside, still wearing her coat. She was cold, but she also wanted to avoid exposing the contours of her body. Judging by the number of doors, it was a 3-bedroom apartment. The only items of furniture in the living room were 4 chairs and a table, a plasma TV, and a cabinet for kitchenware, mostly empty. Shinoi turned on the heating. The dark kitchen with its island seemed mostly bereft of objects. There was none of the stuffy smell characteristic of other people's houses. Instead, the air had a clean, whitish quality, not dissimilar to a brand new office. On the other side of the kitchen counter, Shinoi set out paper towels, sponges, and washing up liquid. The bowls and whisk are in the rack under the sink, but they haven't been used in a long time, so it might be best to give them a wash first. The cleaner comes once a month, so the kitchen itself shouldn't be dirty. I did a deep clean of the oven and the sink, so I think they should be okay. Since my wife and daughter left, I only come back 3 or 4 times a month, but I pay all the bills. The water and the gas will work. The divorce finally went through the other day, so the time has probably come for me to sell it, or else to get rid of the other place, but I can't seem to decide. I'll just sit here and work, so do whatever you need to. Shinoi made for the kitchen table. He took his laptop from his bag and began tapping away at its keys, apparently unfazed by her presence. Hesitantly, Rika moved into the kitchen with Kajii's recipe and the ingredients in hand and turned on the lights. The bulbs made a buzzing noise and the surroundings slowly lit up. From over the counter, she glanced at Shinoi's profile. Had his wife stood in this same place and looked at him? The room wasn't that large, and yet he seemed terribly far away. The kitchen was a lonely place, she thought. She waited until the tap water ran hot, then washed her hands and dried them with a paper towel. The beige foreplate was spotless, not a single smudge or burn mark, making it impossible to get a sense of the family that had once lived here. When Rika opened up the oven, out wafted the smell of baked caramel. She wiped the insides with a paper towel, but all that came off was a little grease. Knowing this was hardly the time to hesitate, she spoke out straight away. The recipe says to preheat the oven to 170 degrees. I've never done this before, so would you mind having a look for me? Shinoi came over and fiddled with the controls. A blue flame rose up, flickering, inside the pitch-black cavity of the oven. When Rika opened the cupboards beneath the sink as instructed, she found a whisk, knives, and a plastic spatula. She couldn't see any pans or chopping boards, though. There were several cake tins, and Rika reached for the oblong pound cake one. She found the burn marks at the edges, dating back to who knew when. Very reassuring. She pulled out the large, medium, and small bowls and a sieve. To be safe, she washed them all with a washing-up sponge, then dried them off with a paper towel. Laying a sheet of paper towel on top of the scales, she measured out 500 grams of flour. As she was sieving the flour into the bowl, Shinoi said, still looking at his laptop screen, "You might want to put some baking powder in, just to be sure." That recipe looked pretty authentic. This is your first time making a cake, right? Rika stopped moving. The flour falling softly through the metal mesh formed a tiny tornado the width of her fingertip. The remaining clumps rolled forlornly around in the sieve. I know from the recipes I've seen online that it's normal to put baking powder in a Cotter quartz, but I want to make it according to Manako Kajii's instructions. So earnest. You know she's not watching you right now, don't you? No, Rika thought she's here. Can't you sense her presence? She's looking at us and grinning. When she was attending to the ingredients, Rika could always feel Kajii's gaze. But if she said any of this to Shinoi, he'd think she'd gone mad. She measured out the granulated sugar, then beat 3 eggs, the equivalent of 500 grams. It's you who told me to offer my heart on a plate, remember? I want to be sincere with her. Despite the fact that she's robbed several innocent men of their lives, Rika pretended not to hear. She took the butter from its box and opened up its foil wrapper. It was hard and cold. She didn't want to create more washing up than necessary, and she still hadn't located a chopping board, so she sliced it on top of the paper and placed it on the scale. There was a tiny fragment left over on the knife, which she raised to her mouth. The lack of salt meant it coasted across her tongue like a placid midwinter wave, leaving her with an impression of silkiness and concentrated fat. She transferred the butter, cut up into pieces, to the bowl. Gripping the whisk in one hand, she plunged it into the center of the butter chunks, but the butter simply broke apart. It seemed to be still too cold and refused to loosen. Even once it began to grow softer, it would cling to the edges of the tulip-shaped wire, making its way inside so that there was barely any butter left inside the bowl. Rika felt her forearms growing heavy, as if waterlogged. After darting a succession of glances at Rika wielding the whisk, Shinoi sighed. He stood up as if he'd been waiting to do so all along, and came over to stand behind her. Rika felt her body tense up at their proximity. That whisking technique is no good. It's said to aerate it, right? I don't really know what that means, though. Aerating butter? Are you quite knowledgeable about baking? The oven had started to warm up. The kitchen, so chilly before, was now filled with soft air. Once again, she could smell that toffee-like smell. She wondered what had last been cooked in it. Creme caramel, perhaps? It was always my job to do the bits that required physical strength. Saying that, he took the whisk from Rika. Their fingers brushed. She was surprised to notice that in comparison with his, her own skin, which she thought of as very rough, seemed soft and smooth. So your wife and daughter were into making cakes? But why did they leave their cake-making stuff behind in your kitchen then? Rika was on the verge of asking, but stopped herself. There was plenty of baking equipment here, but not much else in the way of general cooking implements. She shouldn't intrude any further. Maybe the two of them had actually died, and Shinoi had been lying to cover up his grief. Ignoring her half-finished question, Shinoi grasped the bowl with his large hand and gripped the handle of the whisk at a different angle to how Rika had been holding it. Now all the buttercup yellow fragments filling up the whisk's tulip were propelled outside. Not allowing the whisk to strike the side of the bowl, Shinoi summoned a gentle breeze as he carried on blending the ingredients. Rika took the opportunity to remove her coat, which she no longer needed. Draping it across the back of a chair in the living room, which was beginning to warm up, she turned around to face Shinoi behind the counter. Looking at him from here, he seemed far away. She felt the depth of the rift that opened up between the person cooking and the person not. When she re-entered the kitchen, he began issuing her with instructions. Add in the sugar in 3 equal parts. She tilted the paper towel, letting a single stream of light rain down on the butter, which was gradually taking on the texture of cream, losing its yellow tint and becoming mostly white. Feeling that the slightest word might hurt Shinoi in untold ways, Rika said nothing. Directly in her line of sight, his shoulders moved busily. They don't make cakes anymore. Either of them. A light film of sweat now shone on Shinoi's forehead. When all the sugar had been added into the bowl, Rika let her hands hang down by her sides and looked at him. When my daughter entered middle school, she began dieting. Apparently, she was being bullied for being big. From my perspective, it was just a bit of puppy fat, hardly anything to worry about. I thought it was just kids being kids and didn't take it very seriously. I didn't listen properly to what my wife and my daughter said. I was busy with work, and I guess I was insensitive. Gradually, we stopped being able to talk to each other properly. I didn't really notice anything was wrong until my daughter developed an eating disorder and had to take time off school. By the time they left, cake making was a topic we all avoided. It was hard to know from Shinoi's age when the last time was they might have been here together as a family. Rika felt that any words of consolation she might have offered at this point would feel trite. How old was his daughter now? Where was she and what was she doing? Was she happy with how she looked? Had she developed the strength to brush off the demands of the people around her, whose blade-like nature Rika herself had experienced only recently? It should be okay now, so give it a go. Shinoi passed the bowl and the whisk back to Rika but remained standing beside her, perhaps still concerned about her messing it up. Now, as she moved the whisk, she let out a little noise. It was so much lighter. It wasn't simply soft, coming away willingly from the whisk. The butter was fluffy and white, light as a cloud. This was a totally new guise for butter to take. There's something I've always wanted to ask you. Why do you pass on your tip-offs to me? Of course, I'm grateful for them. I truly appreciate it. I have a lot of respect for you as a person. But I do sometimes feel anxious about the whole situation because I'm not in a position to be able to give you anything back. I know this might sound rude, but sometimes I wonder if I'm exploiting my own femininity. If something might be expected of me, at some point, to pay you back. I know that's a terrible thing to say. Rika did her best not to look at him. Shinoi poured glugs of brightly colored beaten egg into the bright white buttercream Rika was whipping. It'll separate if you stop, so carry on. It took her a few seconds to figure out that he was talking about the mixture. No, that's not what my intentions are. I've not. There's been none of that sort of thing in my life for almost 5 years now. If I've misled you in some way, then I apologize. Rika assiduously mixed in the thin dribbles of egg that Shinoi poured into the mixture, trying as best as she could to retain the air that he'd integrated. The yellow and the white came together to form a beautiful hue. This is probably a crass way of putting it, but I think I wanted to do something for someone and experience their gratitude. I guess I was missing that in my life. I'm just your typical old dude wanting to pat themselves on the back. Of all the weekly magazine journalists I know, you seem to me the most honest and trustworthy. At the same time, you also struck me as someone who is bad at lying and would therefore find it difficult to form a relationship with sources. Confronted by this evidence of her own excessive self-consciousness, Rika felt her stomach boil over, but the feeling soon died down, and the cold tension she'd been carrying melted away too. She knew that from now on, she would find it easier to be around Shinoi. The eggs, butter, and sugar combined gently to create a soft mountain. Rika was about to add in the flour with the rubber spatula, but Shinoi stopped her. This part is tricky, so you'd better watch me do it first. Rika found it funny to see this side of him, but she decided to trust him. When he took the spatula, their fingers brushed together again, but this time she didn't think anything of it. It seems like you're good at cooking, and yet you don't. It's a waste. Shinoi cut through the mixture with the spatula and went about mixing the dough choppily. The flour and the yellow buttercream took it in turns to hide behind one another, giving the insides of the bowl a chaotic appearance. She suddenly felt concerned about the gray tinge of his skin. If it's just for myself, I really can't be bothered to cook good, healthy food. There's not much point in making sure I live to a grand old age anyway. Saying this, he held out the bowl towards her. Inside, the shiny mixture rose up in a nicely rounded little mound. To save the bother of looking for a grater, Rika had used the back of a knife to remove the zest of the lemon, which she now added into the dough. She poured the mixture into the cake tin and dropped the heavy tin on the counter to get rid of any excess air. Finally, she cut a slit in the top with a knife, put the tin on a baking sheet, and opened the oven to slide it in. A blast of hot air struck her cheeks, and she marveled at the flames burning in the darkness. She set the timer for 50 minutes, shut the door of the oven, and let out a small sigh. Then she went towards the washing up. I think not taking care of yourself properly is a form of violence. Shinoi had returned to the table and was gazing at his computer screen as if he were uninvolved in the discussion, but Rika went on. Treating yourself badly is a way of directing your anger at someone. I myself. But she couldn't say it. Right now, she couldn't say it. She kept her eyes fixed on the foam oozing out of the washing up sponge. Could it be true that, quite unconsciously, she'd been hurting people? That by living her life the way she had, she'd been hurting her mother, Mizushima, Reiko, and Makoto, just like her father had once done to her? By treating himself badly, he had accused the people around him. When it came to cleanliness, this apartment in which she now stood and her father's Mitaka place were worlds apart, but in atmosphere they closely resembled one another. Both were former family homes that had become ruins. She didn't hate Shinoi's apartment, but she wouldn't have wanted to be here for long. It wouldn't take much time, she sensed, for her 15-year-old self to come flooding back to her. Now Shinoi spoke in an emotionless tone, different from before. You're saying that even a man with not a single person in his life who cares about him has an obligation to take care of himself properly? That's a pretty exacting view. Rika dried off the bowls and other cooking implements and returned them to their original positions, then wiped down the counter and left the kitchen. Putting on her coat, she sat down opposite Shinoi. A sweet smell drifted over to her from the oven. I would argue that even thinking that way is a form of wordless violence. Refusing to look after yourself because there's nobody around to care about you is a form of violence towards somebody. To my eyes, you're not living a reckless sort of life, but if you truly don't care what becomes of you, then that's really sad. Won't that wind up hurting your daughter eventually, even if she doesn't know about it now? I believe that Kajii's victims could have been happy without a woman if she hadn't been around. Even if there was nobody to care for them, they could have cared for themselves. Or they could have looked for help. That's not that difficult a thing to do. I think that maybe, as a journalist, that's the thing I most want to say. Shinoi dropped his eyes to his computer, saying nothing. Rika wasn't sure if her words were reaching him, and even if they were, she wasn't confident about what she was saying. After a while, she rested her head on the table and shut her eyes. As she was shaken gently awake, she realized the oven timer was going off. The room was filled with the heady smell of the cake. Have a look. Peering into the open oven, Rika let out a yelp. The copper-colored dough had risen up over the top of the tin to create a mountain range whose central rift offered a peek of its golden insides. With a towel-wrapped hand, Shinoi pulled out the baking sheet. The sweetly flavored heat fanned at Rika's fringe. It's amazing that it's risen so well with just 4 ingredients. It's all thanks to your whipping. So this was the kind of wall that Kajii had been talking about, Rika thought. They didn't have to be made of hard bricks and cold concrete. They could be made of sweet, soft dough and still offer protection. She removed the cake as quickly as she could from the tin, for fear of burning herself. Placing the freshly baked cotter quartz on a piece of aluminum foil, she quickly cut it into 10 even slices. Seeing the bright yellow of its inside and the steam rising up from within, her cheeks flushed in pleasure. She wrapped 2 slices in aluminum foil and held them out to Shinoi. I know it's not much, but this is for you. I've got to go and take the rest to somebody while it's still warm. It's all part of the agreement with Kajii. Your boyfriend. Rika nodded. Shinoi waved his hand as if to say go. Something about the gesture gave Rika to understand that this man was still a father. She wrapped up the rest of the cake loosely so as to keep in the warm air. The bundle felt soft, like a baby. She washed up the still warm baking tin, knife and baking tray, and dried them off with paper towels. She opened the oven and checked that it was properly turned off. Are you leaving now too? Rika didn't want to leave Shinoi alone in this room, suffused with its sweet smell. I need to do a couple of things before I go, and I want to air the place a bit too. You go ahead, before the cake gets cold. Rika left the apartment, turning back several times to glance behind her. The sight of Shinoi's profile getting narrower through the crack in the door made her chest feel tight. Outside the apartment block, she broke into a run. The cold didn't make her flinch as it had before. On reaching the main road, she hailed a cab and got to the office having only just exceeded the starting fare. She hadn't come to the 7th floor, where the books department was, since her initial training. It was well past 1 a.m., yet there were still a few people dotted around the office. Spotting Makoto poring over some proofs with a serious expression, she caught his eye and nodded towards the kitchen, indicating for him to come. He had a cold, aged look that unsettled her. What is it? His expression as he came in hunched to the chaotic office kitchen was one of confusion. Remembering the night of the pasta, her resolve flickered, but she knew she had to get him to eat the cake as soon as possible. She didn't care if he thought the gesture too much, too domestic. He had to eat it before it cooled. She created a space on the trolley piled with shop-bought biscuits and cakes, set the cotter quartz down, and spoke quickly to cover her embarrassment. I baked a cake. At my friend's house, who lives just over there. It's just come out of the oven, and I wanted you to taste it while it's warm. Valentine's Day's just round the corner after all. I'm begging you, please don't overthink this. I just wanted one time to do something like this, that's all. She washed her hands and unwrapped the foil. A burst of sweet steam rose into the room. Hesitantly, Makoto reached for a piece and lifted it to his mouth. It's warm, he said, and then began chewing, his expression somehow troubled. His hair looked more bouffant than last time she'd seen him, and he had stubble on his chin. I always thought that I'd be imposing on you if I did something like this, but I think that, on reflection, that's exactly what's been lacking. I've started to realize that nothing ever happens if you don't impose on people. After a little while, Makoto reached out for another slice. It was all thanks to Shinoi. Rika thought that it had turned out a success. I've never had cake fresh out of the oven before. Makoto's breath was sweet and hot. His voice sounded better lubricated than before. Or actually, that's not true. Maybe once, at a friend's house in primary school. His mother baked madeleines. They were still warm, and they tasted different to anything I'd eaten before. I was amazed. When my mom came home from work, I said I wanted to eat them again, and she looked really sad. I told myself then that I'd never again ask her to make me food. This has the same smell as those madeleines did. Fresh and sweet and sour. It's the lemon zest. It's not the taste of authentic home cooking or anything, it's just lemon zest. Your mom didn't have the time, and that's okay. Doing this takes time. It's not about affection, I've realized. It's just about time. You don't realize that until you do it. Rika knew that she'd succeeded in her mission because she'd acted quickly and decisively. If she'd hesitated about taking up Shinoi's offer, she couldn't have done it. If she could hone her powers of decision-making about the rest of her life choices, was it possible that she'd find the time to cook and read and bake cotter quartz for fun at the end of the working day? Maybe that was the kind of wall that Kajii was talking about. Do you want to meet my mom sometime? I feel like you and her would get along. Rika nodded. She'd been avoiding this for so long. If it ever got out that both the ramen evening and this cake-baking experiment were carried out at Kajii's instruction, would Makoto be hurt? She wondered. Why did you leave the other night? In the time it took her to comprehend his words, Rika polished off 2 slices of the still-warm cake. That other night, getting back freezing cold from the ramen restaurant, she had been so relieved by her full belly and the warmth of the bed and Makoto's smell that she'd immediately fallen into a deep sleep. When she woke up in the morning, there was no sign of Makoto next to her, as he'd warned her there wouldn't be, only a note on the bedside table. She'd been convinced he hadn't noticed her escaping. I had a real craving for ramen. I couldn't resist. That stomach of yours really leads you around, he said in disbelief, but there was a new note of sweetness and kindness to his voice. Don't just disappear like that without saying anything again. It made me worried. Now he reached for her wrist, pulled her close to him, and kissed her. It came to her then that on that night, their lips hadn't touched. Now, their chapped lips made a funny rustling noise as they brushed together. Both their tongues tasted of lemon zest and butter. Tokyo had seen its first snowfall of the year, and the toes of Rika's leather shoes got wet on the way to the detention house. For the moment the snow was mixed with sleet and seemed unlikely to settle, but she resolved to dig out her wellies that evening. Listening to Kajii, her attention kept being drawn to her soggy toes inside her shoes. Kajii was wearing a baggy-ribbed sweater over a shirt, covering up the outline of her body that was usually on display. The tip of her nose was faintly red. His mother is like mine, then. Neglecting the household in the name of self-expression and depriving her children of sufficient affection as a result. That murder case in Shinonome amounts to the same thing. It only happened because the mother insisted on having her own way. The desire to express themselves isn't the only reason that people go out to work, though. That woman, for one, was under a lot of financial pressure. That doesn't mean you should sacrifice your children. Both your mother and his could have gone out to matchmaking parties and found someone to remarry. Why did they try to make it work all by themselves? I can't think of any reason for doing that other than being enamored with themselves. That someone should reach adulthood without tasting a freshly baked cake is a misfortune of irredeemable proportions. How come you knew the taste, then, when your mother didn't bake for you? My father was interested in cooking and was a big influence on us, so from primary school on my sister and I used to bake cakes ourselves. My paternal grandmother, she's dead now, but she used to make us fresh donuts and ohagi. She was a beautiful, domestic woman with a great talent for supporting men. My aim is to become like her. Do you still want to have children? At this unexpected question, Kajii's eyes began to glisten. I do. The ultimate happiness for women is to find their soulmate, raise his children, and make delicious food. And to do so is to make a contribution to society. This wasn't far off the sort of things Reiko came out with, Rika thought. Kajii was trying to sever her ties with the past and change the present as a way of obtaining the childhood she had never had, and doing so all alone. Even in her current situation, Kajii still hadn't given up on the idea of children. Her way of going about things might seem conservative, but in fact, it spoke more of a lack of expectations placed on the opposite sex. If I'm going to do an interview with you, I want to speak about my childhood. For that to happen, you need to know more about the place where I grew up. Don't you think? Rika had, of course, thought about this before. She'd only taken paid leave from the company once since joining to attend her grandmother's funeral, but now, with the possibility of an exclusive interview on the horizon, she might be able to take a few days off if she had a word with the editorial desk. She knew Yasudamaki in Agano was a peaceful village filled with dairy farms, 40 minutes by car from Niigata Station and home to the factory for a well-known yogurt brand. Yes, you must go and visit the house I grew up in. Rika hadn't predicted that Kajii herself would suggest the trip, though. If she went, she had been thinking, it would be of her own volition. My mother and sister live there by themselves. My mother is unwell and can't go out much, and she's pretty frosty towards journalists, but my sister is on my side. I've spoken of you to her, so she'll treat you kindly. I'll give you her contact details, and you can let her know when you expect to be there. Kajii's sister had got divorced and returned to her hometown after Kajii's arrest. It was unexpected, then, to hear that the two were on good terms after the sister had ostensibly had her life turned upside down by Kajii's actions. To be frank, I always thought you'd severed your ties with your hometown. I got that feeling when I went to eat the ramen. Your way of thinking about and doing things is always so painful to behold. Severing ties and so on. It's as if every day is a war. It's only a bowl of ramen. However many times I tell you this, it doesn't seem to get through, so I'll make it very clear for you. My life up until coming here wasn't the teeth-grinding ordeal that you think it was. It was fun, easy, frivolous. I was on my own because I was too busy having love affairs and eating delicious food to need that cloying type of friendship where you go to the toilet together and dab away each other's tears and all that nonsense. With the support of my men, I could remain a princess. They were on the verge of being washed away by Kajii's relaxed tone, but with a struggle Rika brought back her memories of Yasukuni Dori at dawn, as glimpsed from the ramen restaurant, and of the night she'd used up all that physical energy making the cake. Even now, the joints of her arms were faintly aching. When they heard that someone was full-figured and liked cooking and eating, most men imagined someone quiet and domestic. Someone whose interior life would not surpass their own. But did that reasoning really hold up? Eating was ultimately an individual and egoistic compulsion, Rika was starting to realize. A gourmand was ultimately a seeker of the truth. You could wrap up their mission in all kinds of fancy language, but they were simply confronting their desires day in and day out. As you learned to cook, you became increasingly able to shut out the outside world and create a fortress within your own spirit. You hunted down your prey, using fire and blades to fashion them into the form you desired. Reading Kajii's blog posts, she'd been struck by her intense stoicism. It took a deathly earnestness to remain faithful to her desires at all times. Mothers around the world didn't put in the work of coming up with and then cooking the day's menu because those foods were what they themselves wanted to eat, but because they were thinking of their family. From a certain moment on, Kajii had started making the food she wanted to eat when she wanted to eat it. She no longer heeded the physical condition or the palates of the men she was with. That was why her food had the wild deliciousness of something attained through black magic. She could enjoy the act of cooking because it didn't pain her in any way. That was something that her victims failed to notice, Rika thought. Taking her cooking as an expression of her affection towards them, they'd happily eaten it. Wasn't the same true of Makoto? She'd made him a single bowl of pasta and he'd mistakenly assumed she was forcing her affection on him, hinting she wanted to get married, and rejected her as a result. But that was pasta Rika had made for her own sake. That was why it had tasted so good. Kajii's tone seemed unusually soft. I don't like my mother very much, but I'm close to my sister. She has always been a bit of a basket case who could never do anything unless I was around. Besides, there are so many delicious local delicacies where I'm from. I would love for you to try them. If you can, I'd like you to visit my father's grave. It must be totally buried in snow at the moment. A warm loyalty coursed through her words like a pulse. If you do visit, I think you'll understand why I love butter the way that I do. Wrap up warm when you go. It's called the snow country for a reason. Niigata in February is bitingly cold. It's not like Tokyo, where everyone loses their minds at the first dusting of snow. The convicted serial killer, sending a journalist to her native snow country when the cold was at its most bitter, now flashed Rika a kind, maternal smile.